In our 9-city study, we decided to go deeper into what was happening as opposed to having a wider lens, in the hope that some deeper analysis would reveal some important things of what were happening in urban education. As is obvious in any 9-city study, it can't be truly representative of all urban school districts. Nonetheless, it does include the 3 largest school districts in the country. It includes cities from every region, and it includes cities that have a mix of local and state educational policies. We obtained our data for the 9-city study through Freedom of Information requests, asking teacher-level data for 10 years, which would enable us to follow teachers over the course of that 10-year. We did a number of different pieces of analysis with that data, which I will just run through quickly for you. As you can see in your report, the first thing that we provide is a snapshot. If you were a visitor to the city's schools at the time that our data ended, what would you see in the schools? That is in the snapshot. Tells you both the racial and ethnic breakdown of teachers and students. We then take 2 citywide looks that are longitudinal. We look at the share of the teaching force by race and ethnicity. So if African Americans were 12% at the start of the 10 years, how did that progress over time and where did they end? And then we took a second look at population changes within racial and ethnic groups. And these are 2 different ways of looking at the same reality. They tell us different things. Both of them are important to look at. What you will generally find in our data is that what might look like an even small amount of change in a teaching share can translate into a really fairly significant change in a teaching population for a particular ethnic group. We then look at representation gaps, the difference between students and teachers in each racial and ethnic group for both charter schools and district schools. We take a look at the intersection of gender with race and ethnicity, because one of the important features of the representation gaps is do black and brown boys see black and brown male teachers before them? And then we go on to trying to figure out what are the factors that are producing the trends that you see. We look at different rates of new hires to the existing teaching force. Are they maintaining the levels, for example, of Black and Hispanic representation in the workforce, or are they falling below it? We take a look at the rate of sector leavers by race and ethnicity. Are Black teachers staying more than white teachers? Are they leaving more than white teachers? Again, disaggregated for charter and district. We look at the cumulative leaving rates for new teachers to see if there's any differences there by race and ethnicity. And finally, we look at what schools teachers are teaching in by race and ethnicity. And we look at that in terms of free and reduced lunch status as a proxy for income, and we look at that in terms of student race and ethnicity. These are our findings. As a general rule, there is a serious underrepresentation of minority groups in the teacher workforces in each one of these 9 cities. And that underrepresentation is particularly marked for Black and Hispanic teachers. As a general rule, there are large representation gaps between minority group students and teachers. And again, they tend to be particularly marked for Black and Hispanic teachers and students. Both of these, both the underrepresentation gap and the underrepresentation of teachers are more pronounced in charter schools than in district schools, because as a general rule, charter schools have whiter staffs and blacker and browner student populations. We then looked at the share of teacher workforce and teacher population, and we saw some significant variations among racial and ethnic groups in these cities. Black teachers lost shares of the population and lost general numbers of population in every one of the 9 cities. The shares went from small amounts of 1% to massive amounts of 25% in New Orleans and 28% in Washington, D.C. Population losses were even greater, from a low of 15% for Black teachers in New York City to a high of 62% for Black teachers in New Orleans. Hispanic teachers posed a better picture. It was not what needed to be done, but it certainly was not as bleak as that of Black teachers. In general, they were either stuck in neutral, where they were maintaining their share of the teacher workforce, or they were making very small gains. Given the growing numbers of Hispanic students in these cities, neither of them is adequate for the task. Los Angeles stood out in this regard as one of the few bright spots where there were significant increases in Hispanic teachers in both the charter sector and the district sector. We then looked to see what was contributing to these changes, and to what extent it was a problem of new teacher hiring, which in Richard's analysis is actually a success on the national level, and to what extent it was a problem of teacher leavers. And we found that, that the pattern that exists on the national level is not reproduced in these 9 cities. And that in most of these cities, they had problems on both sides of the ledger, on both the hiring side and on the retention side. There's not one clear pattern, but clearly those are problems that for these cities to address the diversity of their teaching force, they're going to have to look at both sides of that ledger. Lastly, we looked at where teachers were teaching, and we found that in these cities, all teachers, regardless of race and ethnicity, were teaching in schools with high free and reduced lunch status among their students and high concentrations of minority students. However, particularly Black teachers, but also Hispanic teachers, had a moderately higher rate of both free and reduced lunch and of concentration of minority students than did white teachers.